Today is March 24th. The time now is 11 a.m., maybe 1 after 11, minute after 11. Can I get Vaughn, can you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Absolutely. If I can have everyone stand up, face the flag, place your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You may have a seat.
Thank you so much, Vaughn. Madam Clerk, can we get the roll call, please?
Maria, you're muted.
Let me just acknowledge everyone that's here. City Manager Vaughn Norris.
Present.
I'm going to go ahead and call the roll.
Present.
Person? I apologize. I was unmuted.
Okay, but please call the roll.
Okay. Chairwoman Reyes English?
Yes.
City Manager Norris?
Present.
City Attorney Kim?
Here.
Greg McLean?
Here.
Kenny Craig?
Present.
Hey, everyone is here. Madam Clerk, please read the guidelines for oral communications.
Pursuant to Government Code Section 549.4.3, all remarks should be addressed to the committee as a body and not to any individual member. During oral communications, speakers shall have 3 minutes to state their business. The Brown Act prohibits the committee from providing a detailed response or acting upon any items not contained on the agenda. The committee as a body shall have the discretion at the close of oral communications to refer any remarks to the City Clerk Department for the study, investigation, report, and or recommendations.
Madam Clerk, do we have any speakers wanting to speak under oral communications?
Chairwoman Reyes English, the public has been directed via the meeting agenda to log into or dial into Zoom for the ability to comment. The City Clerk office has received no phone calls for this meeting. If any attendees wish to speak, please raise their hand.
Okay, thank you for that, Madam Clerk. Is there anyone else who wishes to address this body? If there are no objections, I will declare oral communications closed, so ordered. Before we go on to item number 2, let me just give a little housekeeping. Please address the chair by raising your hand to be recognized. And everyone, please mute your phones. And I'll go ahead and proceed with, let's see. We had neither any communications from anyone wanting to speak, and then we have here no written communications from what I understand, correct, Madam Clerk?
That's correct.
Okay. Item number 3, workshop recap and announcements. Mrs. Anderson, thank you. If you could go ahead.
Yes, Madam Chair. We have conducted 3 out of the 4 workshops. We have received several comments during those workshops that we will be reviewing for the ordinance and exploring some of those options presented by the attendees and the residents. We have 1 left. It will be on March 30th, so next Wednesday from 6 to 8 p.m. So far, we have about 5 registrations for that. Further down in the agenda, we had an item that I would like to actually pull, which was consolidating the meetings, the town hall meetings, which is item number 6. We are going to continue to move forward with that 4th hearing, so we don't need to do that. Some of the things that we were going to also just address during the workshop announcements and recap is that everything is televised, and all of the questions that are being asked during the workshop will be made part of our frequently asked questions, or our FAQ sheet that will be on the website, or that is on the website and will be updated after the last meeting with any questions that we had that required a formal address.
Okay. Let me just make mention real quick that I've received some communications from the community, but they've all been positive. they've been educated, and that's exactly what we wanted the town hall meetings to be, is to provide additional information and to provide an educational background as to how we got here. So thank you for that. I want to go ahead and go on to item number 4, an ordinance update, which is the uses and activities, activities that we've been looking at West Hollywood. So Ms. Anderson, can you please proceed regarding the items listed?
Yes. So we're really excited to announce that we have combed through the West Hollywood Ordinance and pulled out some of the gems that we think the city would be most interested in reviewing. Some of the things that came up at the workshop were security concerns. So we definitely pulled some of those West Hollywood regulations around security and what that would look like. We also pulled out the lounge section so that we can get deep into that, what that would look like in a rollout. We had some conversations with the city attorney about doing a more top-down kind of a work or overview for the city council, addressing all of the various activities that they have proposed, because we have not, the city has not adopted any of those activities as of yet. So we've been asked to do a comprehensive overview for the city council that will go into each of those various activities that they assign to the working group to review and report back. So we are working on that presentation now. It will be a rather robust overview of all of these license types, including an economic analysis of what a model of what these uses could look like in terms of revenue for the city. So that's one of the things that we haven't tackled yet in our working group, is the economic benefits of cannabis. So we're working on an economic analysis. So we have that going on. And then the other part of this was just the timeline. So the 30th is our last workshop. And after that workshop is when we will likely work with the city attorney to get the presentation to the city council with everything that we've collected from the workshops, and then also the progress on the ordinance, as well as that comprehensive overview, including that economic analysis.
I have a question with regards to the economic development portion of your presentation just now. Would this include the request that we recommended, that the licenses that ultimately are going to be, what I understand, the license type, are we going to identify how we capture community benefit?
Absolutely. So it will address both the revenue for each individual business type, or at least a model. Obviously, we're using projections, but we're going to be working with a accounting firm that does this for cannabis. So they have a lot of good data that we can actually, real life data we can pull from in real time. So we're going to be working with them to establish a model that the city can use for each type. And then also looking at those community benefit program and what it would look like for each operator to pay into that for the city.
Right. I think a lot of it is taken from the visitations that we've made to various businesses in West Hollywood, in Los Angeles, in Long Beach, that have a disclosure of sorts that says basically and provides a dollar amount that they have to commit to. So I think that's important too. Attorney, Mr. Kim, go ahead.
Yes, I think we're kind of overlapping a little bit with a discussion item on as number 7, but in any case, while we're on the subject,
7, okay. Mm-hmm.
So,
okay.
So, you know, in addition to the economic aspects, I also requested, I had a conversation with Ms. Anderson about this, about making a presentation for city council so that city council is aware of what kind of revenues for the city as well as the business aspect, along with what type of license would bring in extra employment. But if we want to just do we want to just kind of mix number 7 together with the ordinance section right now? If I guess that's what we're doing anyways. But in any case, that's the kind of area that I thought that the council may be interested in finding out, so that we can do a presentation by the consultants for a city council meeting. And also, Ms. Anderson and I discussed the different types of business ventures with cannabis. Ms. Anderson mentioned that there are some that are really large, like the ones that we want to see in downtown, and smaller retail social equities programs, along with like some of if the city is interested in pursuing smaller size license aspects. But I don't think, like for myself, having visited downtown where it's really big facility, what that entails. So Ms. Anderson has expertise on that, so I thought maybe that would be something that City Council may be interested in as well. In terms of the ordinance, looking at West Hollywood ordinance, aside from security and lounge, I would also be interested in getting to examine their design element into their business, because I was very impressed when we went to West Hollywood, the setup and the design, and including the package displays and whatnot. So Ms. Anderson during one of the town hall meetings mentioned that West Hollywood requires a design element into their ordinance. So I'll be very interested in incorporating those type of ordinance into Hawthorne's ordinance as well.
I know that's good. I'm confident that we're gonna provide a good cannabis program with ideas that are working currently in other cities that we visited and we have spoken in length about. I'm glad that we're not necessarily trying to reinvent the wheel. However, I also understand that Hawthorne is unique and a little bit different than West Hollywood, and we all understand that. And then I'll go ahead and we'll talk a little bit more when we get to item 7, just to assure that we're on point with regards to that discussion and what we're discussing right now with regards to the ordinance update. Is there anything more from planning? Anyone else on the board that would like to contribute or make a comment on? No. Okay, thank you for that. And I like the tax accounting firm that's gonna be making an assessment also. That's good to know. Let's go on to item number 5, the sensitive uses and buffer zone discussion. And let's see who, Ms. Anderson, you want to go ahead with that?
Yeah, I'll start and then I can pass it over to Greg. We looked at some different types of uses that would be classified as sensitive. We started with the state regulations, which are pretty much just schools. And then we looked at some of other uses that would be useful in the city, and some comments from the workshops included, staying out of certain zones or around different zones within the city, or economic corridors, I guess. And so we looked at those things, and I'll let Greg show the map. I think we have the map now, or the draft map. And we looked at some additional uses such as rehab centers and things like that, parks, recreational centers. So we want to create a map that will have buffers around those areas, so we wouldn't have cannabis businesses, or at least some cannabis business types. For example, we wouldn't have retail next to a recreational center, for example. Those are the things that we're mapping out. Greg, did you want to take over from there and then maybe pull the map up?
Well,
the draft map?
I didn't save the map where I could find it very fast, and I'm looking for it frantically right now. So
okay, no problem. We can talk a little bit more about the committee recommendations. So one of the things that we wanted to bring back before the committee is showing you the map, and then also the uses that we have identified as sensitive. Again, we use most of the ones from the existing legislation from the state. But we wanted to get an idea if the committee had any additional sensitive uses, or if the committee had any recommendations for sensitive uses or buffer areas. I recall during the town hall meeting, I believe it was Councilwoman Valentine who brought up a good point about some of being a buffer around the Costco and the recreational center. So some of those are the things that we've noted, but there may be other areas in the city that the committee would like to examine or consider.
Let me just make some comments, because early on we've been discussing those buffers and been discussing sensitive areas. And I think that was very early on. And then again, not trying to reinvent the wheel here, but a lot of the recommendations is also the state's recommendations. We're not, trying to alleviate from that. But I'm going to go ahead, Mr. Kim, go ahead and provide your comment, and then I'll finish.
Yes, thank you. So I know the state law is that it's schools that are sensitive use, and its radius of 600 feet is the area that any shop must, that's the sensitive radius zone is 600 feet. And I know that the law is that the cities can expand that 600 feet to greater than 600 feet. So I had a request by someone that that we do not allow business in the path that kids would walk back and forth from school, which is kind of difficult to assess because it depends on where a particular student lives. So my suggestion is that we expand that 600 feet radius to perhaps up to 1,000 feet. Maybe that would make it more comfortable for some of the concerns that I've heard.
Go ahead, Mr. McLean.
I have the map now. If you'd like, I'll put it up on the screen.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Is it showing? Looks like it's showing something else. Let me try that again.
We see the map. I see the map, Greg.
Okay, I don't, but all right. I'm not sure that I would recommend expanding this 600 feet for schools, because if you look at the map, all of the blue places are schools.
Right.
And what we're not showing here, and I'd like to show in the next meeting, is what a 600-foot radius looks like. But if you look at the very tiny little scale at the bottom right, the little black and the white block, the very first two, is 500 feet. So if you draw a buffer of about that size around each of those blue, you're eliminating an awful lot of the city. And you're probably cutting into a good chunk of the commercial areas as well, considering where these schools are located. If you went to 1,000 feet, you would be doing considerably more, elimination of prime commercial areas. So I would not want to make that decision today without actually plotting those buffers.
Yeah. So
let's hold off on that decision would be my recommendation. But I'll have our GIS person plot the 600-foot buffer around each of these sensitive uses, and then we'll do 1,000 around the schools just to show how much additional area is excluded. We'll also try to make a map that just shows the commercial areas, just to show what we're working with, and then put them together. We only have one person who works on this, and it's not her primary job. So I'm sorry, that's why it's taking so long to get these maps produced.
It's okay. And I agree. I mean, I wanted to, stay within the mandates. It's working. And considering the city size that we are, it in my opinion, that's a whole lot, and it doesn't seem if that's what we're going to do, that this is going to be even close to a good cannabis program. Mr. Kim?
Yeah, so also I think we're just thinking about retail shops that's open to the public when we're discussing this, because some of the license, if for instance, manufacturing or delivery type of license doesn't really need a storefront. I don't know if state law would apply to those kind of business, but manufacturing and delivery or testing, they wouldn't even have a storefront, so it wouldn't really affect, I don't think, the sensitive use aspects of it. But anyways, I just want to put that out there as well.
Miss Ebony?
Yes, that was actually, what I was going to recommend is that we look at retail separately from the non-storefront businesses when we're talking about the radius. Obviously, we still have to stick to the minimum of the state regulations for all the business types regarding schools, but some of these other buffer areas or setback areas, such as we have on here parks and recovery centers or treatment facilities, those aren't covered in the legislation. So some of those could be specific to retail if that was something that the city wanted to entertain. I think it's important to note the size of the city. It's relatively small, so having 1,000-foot setbacks will, as you mentioned, Madam Chair, really prevent some of our commercial areas from being able to meet meet the business needs, because there's not also a lot of available real estate. So we have to kind of think about all those layers, and we do have the GIS department solo warrior that she is working on this overlay map that we can see all of these different layers. And so once that's there, you can get a better idea graphically of where we're working, what we're working with in terms of space in the city. But I do think that we could look at different setbacks for different uses. And the city of Los Angeles does that. They have a standard, I think their radius is actually 700 feet around from different, certain businesses. Like, for example, they don't allow retailers to be right next to each other. They require them to be within 700 feet of each other. So we can work with the state law, and then also by license type. So those are just some options that we have when we're thinking about setbacks. The other idea I had was looking at some of the sensitive areas that you want to maybe not have any cannabis activities around. You have some of these clusters of schools, and maybe there's residential around those areas. This map is at a smaller scale, so we can't see all of the city zoning. But maybe residential is a zone that you just don't want cannabis businesses in at all. And so we can also limit activity by zone and by type.
Okay, Mr. Norris?
Thank you. Question for you, Ebony. Are there any state mandates that require 1,000 feet distancing? I do remember that coming up during our community meetings. I just want clarification for the public if there's any current mandates for any type of licensing that would require 1,000 foot buffer.
I'm going to have to pass that one to Tony, because I don't know if there's any new legislations that require that. I know some cities have special requirements around 1,000 feet radius with retail or manufacturing. And I know that there's some regulations around manufacturing next to residential, but I haven't heard anything about 1,000-foot radius. Tony, have you gotten any legislative updates regarding that?
No, there hasn't been, but there has been some activity going on, some additional activity, Bond, but specifically to answer your question, no. Like Ebony said, we have seen it on the local level, but not on the state level.
Can I just make some comments with regards to the sensitive areas? I like I like what's all noted here, Greg, on the map. It shows, public schools, private schools, daycare facilities, child, adult, preschool, the treatment and recovery centers, and parks. And when we start, say, for instance, pulling other areas specifically for that type of license, I think what we're doing is ultimately not only making it more difficult, but it's setting up that individual to have to then chase or run and find and secure that particular area that we identified. And that's going to cause, I think, a lot of additional concerns not foreseeing that. Say, for instance, someone is going to get a license for testing, just testing. You're completely right. We don't necessarily need to make them a storefront. However, if there's, say, for instance, an area that is in, say, the commercial zone, and we say that that's the only place they could go, and then at the end of the day, there's nothing there that they could inquire, that's an issue. And I don't want to have to see ourselves having to put ourselves in a pickle. So I really want to assure, again, that we're implementing a good cannabis program based off of past practices from other areas in Los Angeles, and including those that we've visited. So just please keep those also in mind. And of course, we wouldn't have them in communities, right? That wouldn't make any sense. But this here, I do support that. Now, was there any discussion to include churches?
There was. Churches are very difficult for us to map because they don't get licenses, so it's hard for us to always find them. If we were to include churches, the way to deal with it would be to put it upon the applicant to find them, and then to show us where they are within a certain radius of their proposed location.
That makes sense. And then I'm aware of, and you're absolutely right with regards to existing churches, or, a lot of pop-up churches that happen sometimes.
Yeah.
That don't have licensing. And when you find those out, it's because a certain area of the city shows an uptick in parking. And it's like, okay, where did all these cars come from, right? And then the next thing you know, it's a church. And they're occupying all of the patrons parking for businesses. So you're absolutely right on that. Is there anything more to add? Sergeant Craig, do you have anything to add? Anything that you'd like to make a comment on, or if not?
Just I kind of agree with what Greg was saying. If you start expanding that radius, I think it's going to really limit some of the areas. I kind of envision like where we have the microbreweries would be an ideal location. And I think if we started expanding that, we might get close to some schools.
Yeah.
That's my only concern. I think as far as presenting from an ordinance perspective, I kind of think we should maybe stick to the minimums as mandated by state and county law. And if we have to adjust it later, we'll do that. But I think we should probably start with the minimums. Just my personal opinion.
Thank you. Okay, if we're going to go ahead and move on. I'm going to go to item number 6, the town hall meetings. And we already kind of discussed a little bit about that. We talked about how all of the meetings have been televised. We've been receiving public comment during the meetings. We've also received communications via email. We've also had questions posed and answered. There's going to be most frequent asked questions that are going to be posted on our website so that folks could follow that. Today's meeting with regards to discussions that we just made are televised and available for review, public comment again. I'm going to go on to item, and our last meeting is the 30th at 6 p.m. So just to recap the evaluations of the meetings and consolidating. And so with no objections, if there's no objections there, I'm going to go ahead and go on to item number 7. And these are the types of license that would generate the most revenue and employment opportunities. Would you like to go ahead, Mrs. Anderson, and then I'm going to make some remarks, and then if anyone wants to follow, please raise your hand.
Sure. Like I mentioned before, we're going to do an in-depth analysis. We originally were going to present some options to the community, to the committee, and have us discuss those. But after talking to Mr. Kim, I think a better strategy is to present all the options after the economic analysis, so that we have some hard data to pull from. The city previously did a study to evaluate businesses to see what type of what the revenue would look like to have a cannabis program, to support a cannabis program. But what we really want to do now is break that down by license type, and we're going to be able to present that to the city council. At that time, we're also going to be asking the city council to consider what uses they feel that the ordinance should include. So they gave us the marching orders to evaluate all these licenses, and then at that time, they're going to actually make the selection of what licenses types or activities will be included in the ordinance. But just an overview of what we're looking at. We're looking at the retail opportunities and revenue from said retailers, including large MSOs or multi-state operators, as well as small single stores or even social equity operators. We are also looking at larger cultivation sites, as they would employ more people. And most importantly, we're looking at how these various operators can provide jobs and resources for the local community. So local hiring mandates, those types of things that will increase the economic standing in the city overall. So not just what the business itself brings in, but also economic opportunities for your residents.
Can I just add to that? Because I do remember we made the recommendation to the city council and there was some feedback. But before I go there, Mr. Kim might have some discussion on that as well. Go ahead, Mr. Kim.
Yes, so I'm really interested in the type of businesses that could bring in jobs for their local residents. I'm not certain. I know that researching some issues involving like purchasing policy for local vendors, there are some case law on this and some restrictions by the courts. Are there any restrictions by the courts about if we had in the ordinance that, let's say we had like a ordinance requires a quota system for that a certain percentage of the employees working there, and in any city issued license should be local residents. Are there, Tony, if you already know, are there any restrictions like that constitutionally?
Trying to unmute. Sorry about that, Robert. Not that I've seen and know, because Los Angeles has mandates. They have a local mandate, a transitional mandate, and a social equity mandate created around their social equity program. So I've just worked on this because I did a big LA job fair this Saturday, but there has been no pushback, no legislation, no cases that I have seen in regards to that, nor have I gotten any information. And I speak to the LA city attorney about this. He hasn't said anything to me about it as well. So yeah, I think it's fine because LA does have those specific mandates.
Okay, thank you. And then I wanted to kind of, I did a presentation for City Council about the cannabis laws and what to expect in the future. And I think this is from previous discussion, Ebony, with you during one of the working committee meetings, is that we're going to once we come up with a recommended ordinance for City Council, that it's going to list all of the licenses that City Council has approved for us to look into. And then at that point is when the council would decide whether they want to, delete some of the license, some of the type of use license. And then, so basically it would be introduction of the ordinance with all of the licenses. And at that point, we would have a public hearing and council would have an input and take a vote as to which license they would want to keep and not allow in the city. Then we would have to amend that ordinance and come back with a reintroduction of that ordinance before adoption. So is that the plan that you were still thinking of, or are we kind of changing that plan?
Well, I think that's maybe something we can discuss here in the committee. If we do the overview of the economic analysis, I think that would be a good time for the city council to make those decisions as to what license types we should include in the ordinance at that time. And then again, if we would present the ordinance using those. If we want to wait and include all of them, then yes, we can follow that original, path of amending the I guess the resolution or the ordinance. But if we're going to go to the city council anyway for this hearing on the economic opportunities, then it makes sense, in my mind at least, that we go ahead and have them select the activities at that time. But that's more of a question, I guess, for you, Robert, in terms of procedurally, if that will create any issues if we do it in that order.
I think we can do, however, we could do either way. I think we should do the presentation first so that the council is fully educated on the economic aspects, the employment opportunity aspects, so that once they're fully educated on that, then we can bring a separate item for a discussion action for council to vote on the different types of licenses that they would want to pursue in the ordinance. So that way is fine too. It's just I would want the presentation first, and maybe not necessarily in the same meeting, to put it on the agenda as a discussion action for them to decide on. So educational presentation, and let council think about certain aspects of it, and then maybe in the following meeting come back with a discussion action. I think that is a better method that I'm thinking, that they could come back and then fully discuss what kind of license, then because they would then have that information that they seen through your presentation. And your presentation, I think, should if it's a PowerPoint and whatnot, we should post it on the working committee's website, so that, or the city website, so council members can refer back to it, and then they can have later on at the follow-up council meeting, a discussion action to vote on the types of license that they want.
That makes sense to me, Robert. Are you thinking that we hold a study session for the council for this presentation?
Yeah, depending on, because during the council meeting, our presentations are usually limited to about 6 minutes. So if it's a very in-depth presentation, it may be better to do a full study session so that you would have more time for that. But I do want every council members to be fully aware of the economic advantages and disadvantages of type of license, along with the employment opportunity of different license.
Yeah, I would recommend that we do it as a study session. 6 minutes may be not long enough to cover each of these economic opportunities or models in depth. And since we'll be pulling, real hard data, we'll probably need a little more than 6 minutes to present all of that. So if we can think about perhaps what dates we have in mind for that. Also, as we discussed, Robert, one of the other things that I wanted to make sure the presentation includes is some visuals, some renderings, showing what retail could look like using those guidelines that we've pulled, design guidelines from West Hollywood, and some that we've tailored just to the city, what a potential retail location could look like using those guidelines. And so we're going to need some time to pull that together. Renderings take a little bit of time. So if we could talk about timeline on that, that would be very helpful, so we can make sure that we have everything together by that time.
So if the members of this committee is agreeable to following that path, you and I could discuss offline how much time you need for your presentation, and then setting a study session for the council meeting. I just want to say, it would be great if we could somehow bring in photos of something that I have seen in downtown, where Mr. Norris and I took a tour, and we're kind of blown away by the number of people employed there. I mean, there was just such a large group of people working there, and that they're all collecting good wage and full benefits and healthcare, and that really impressed me. So I want to make sure that council is aware of that kind of information that could benefit the residents. So, however time you need, I think that study session is very important for every council members to be aware of of the aspects of this cannabis industry.
Let me,
Oh, I'm sorry.
yeah, let me just really quickly jump in here, because if you remember, we did go to the council early on and we asked them what license types that they were looking at. And if you remember, they included lounge, which was, do you remember that? So they talked about retail, they talked about manufacturing, cultivation, testing, delivery, lounge, and then we spoke about equity. But that's a different component. What we're discussing now is how many per item or per entity that the council agrees upon, correct? So that's gonna be another item altogether. I wanna go back to not necessarily, saying what would generate the most, however, what would benefit the city of Hawthorne and how it would benefit the people of Hawthorne. I do want local hire. I do want union friendly. And I do want an application process that would ban the box to make it more accessible for those that are interested in this type of work. And I think we just have to be able to work with those that are ultimately selected to assure a robust, equitable, more importantly, diverse workforce. And so this is very important. And at some point, I do want to include the requirement for any vendor, however they're selected, that they provide a community benefit giving back to the community. That's important. And I know that other cities are doing it, and I know that other communities are benefiting from at their cannabis programs. Again, giving back to the community and providing for nonprofit organizations, providing for various groups and organizations. And there's other ideas that are coming out of how the cannabis business is not only generating revenue for the cities, however, it's a good partner. It's a good partner with the city. So please keep all of those in mind, and we'll again have to bring that through a study session. But for the most part, I'm going back off of what we already had presented to them previously, and I don't believe anything has changed. If there's anything more, if we finished with item number 7, if there's any more information or comments anyone would like to make, I'm going to go ahead and move now to item number 8, and that's the meeting recap and conclusion. All members and consultants. Any further information that maybe we might have missed?
To the chair?
Yes.
Just curious on how we're going to move forward with the evaluations and what we're going to do with those evaluations of those community meetings. Are we going to present that to council? Are we going to update our website with information? Just wanted to get a kind of a consensus. How do we plan to evaluate the community meetings, and what are we going to do with that data?
I think it's important that the working group committee and myself as chair report out. And I think city manager, city attorney could be helpful in that too. In reporting out after the last meeting of the 30th, to quantify all the participants throughout those meetings, how many, either for or against. Public comment was very important to include. And to be honest, some that walked away were educated. And that's the responses that I've been receiving, that they had heard some concerns and had seen some concerns with regards to misinformation. However, after attending these meetings, they felt a little bit more confident on what the city is trying to do. So that's important too. And feedback from the board members and consultants is also reportable to report out on any other comments, recommendations, or suggestions. But yeah, I think at some point we need to put it on the agenda somewhere, to report out after the 30th meeting. And then, like I said, we could continue to put most frequent questions posed, asked, and put those on the website so that there's a running consensus of what we heard and continue to hear, but received confident responses to those questions posed. I haven't seen too much. I know we have an email address to the Cannabis Working Group Committee, but I haven't seen a whole lot other than questions on where we're at. And we've been making those suggestions for them to follow the meeting, our meetings here every second and fourth Thursday at 11. That's correct. Am I correct? Go ahead, Mr. Kim. Mr. Kim.
You muted, Robert.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, so some of the questions raised by people that spoke up at the town hall meeting that were opposed to the cannabis program, they often brought up, what other cities in South Bay are moving, have a cannabis program. And I just want to, Mr. Norris emailed something to me which was that city of Hermosa Beach is taking a pretty active and fast pace moving with the cannabis program. They already have a committee similar like ours already made. So not that it's a competition, but I've been getting inquiries through the city cannabis email of different business organizations and even a cannabis media company that wanted to know when and where are we at, and when what's the timeline like? So, I know that we kind of briefly touched on timeline, but I guess it's kind of difficult to come up with a timeline for the ordinance to be presented to the city council. But is there some kind of rough estimate, Ms. Anderson, with respect to when you think about how many months it would take or how many weeks it would take for us to propose and recommend an ordinance to city council?
Well, I think some of that depends on what happens after the study session, because obviously the more activities we have and the more guidelines that we are going to impose, it's gonna take more time to develop those. But overall, I would say that if we started the ordinance, we get the direction from the council, and we start building that ordinance, I would say that it's probably going to take about 6 weeks for us to develop the ordinance, write the entire ordinance, go through the committees to get feedback, work with you, Robert, the city attorney, to ensure that all of the requirements are there. That's what I would say in terms of developing that ordinance. But then, of course, an ordinance has an approval process that takes some time too, because we have to have the 2 hearings and so on and so forth. So it will be a couple of months out before we can make a few months out, I should say, before we get to an approved ordinance. Once we have clear direction from the city council on, what exactly we want to include in that ordinance.
So once we come up with the recommended ordinance and the first reading, introduction, and the adoption takes about a month. It takes another 30 days to go into effect. So that's 2 months in itself. And how long do you think, I'm not too familiar with the CEQA analysis process for ordinance on cannabis. Is that something that's time consuming as well?
Well, again, that also depends on what we're allowing and where, right? Because we're going to have to evaluate, is this something that's an infill project where we have some type of CEQA, we're going to have the ability to have CEQA exemptions. Obviously, the ordinance in and of itself, isn't going to be a huge CEQA undertaking, but we do need to look at some of those things with the planning director to determine the zone. Are we using existing zoning? Are we creating new zoning? So I think we're still at the very beginning of this. And since we don't have all of the information before us, it's difficult to create an exact timeline. But overall, I would say we're looking somewhere, closer to winter before we're going to have something concrete where people can see everything, in a clear way and all of the final product. I would say we're looking several months out from now.
And I also bring that up because, so if we have a ordinance that's adopted, that's in effect, then we would have to create a application process for licensing. Does that require additional ordinance as well?
It doesn't require additional ordinance. However, the city has determined that they are going to have the separate committees for that.
Yes.
So we then have to form that committee and go through the process of forming the committee for those two committees, both the selection and also the application committee. So that also takes time, and that is a council decision.
Yes, so that'll be by resolution for the two committees that's still left to be created would be the licensing committee and the oversight committee. And that, I guess it's better if we wait a little bit because we're still far off of the ordinance. So in terms of what we can expect in the next working committee, what kind of agenda do you think we're going to need for that? Because we would have the last town hall meeting completed. The next working committee meeting would be sometime that'll be April 14th. And the town hall is on March 30th, so we would have completed town hall. So what kind of agenda item do you think we would need to place for the next working committee?
I think the one thing that we still need to tackle is the sensitive use map. So a lot of the mapping exercises that we're working on now, that's something that I would like for us to have on the April 14th agenda so that we all have it in front of us and make those determinations on setbacks, because the layers between setbacks and available real estate are really important and critical in these discussions. And it's going to shape how the council determines the number of license types that we will, not only the the license types, but the number of license issued. So we really need to have a really good, deep discussion on that. And we can't do that until those maps are completed.
Okay.
Yeah, and once again, I'd like to see that, the sensitive uses once and for all be presented to council at the latest, as soon as we can. And we got the recommendations when we sent it the first time to them. So can we start presenting pieces that we need to know to council?
Madam Chair, this might be a Robert question, I'm not sure, but what is the formality in adopting those uses? Are we, and I think that's kind of where we were going back and forth, or do we take the uses first and have them formally adopt them? Or do we take the whole ordinance and have them adopted through the ordinance process? So if we're going to do those study session and then have yet another session where the council actually makes a recommendation or adopts these uses, I'm not clear, Robert, on what formal action the council needs to make on that, because as Madam Chair mentioned, they already gave us direction on the types of uses they would like for us to examine. If there's a formal action that needs to happen, then we have to put that in the timeline.
In terms of what's contemplated, the resolution that formed the working committee, it's the recommendation to council is the ordinance that we would come up with. So I thought that the uses and the sensitive use and the mapping whatnot would be part of the ordinance.
Okay.
So, but we would have a study session in which council members at that time could agendize it. So it's a study session and a discussion, not a discussion action, but just a discussion where council members can present their input about, I know that a couple of the council members have some strong feelings about where these businesses should be allowed to be located. So, maybe at that time during the study session, we could hash all that out. And then we could come back with an ordinance to be recommended for council, because I don't want to create too many steps and go back and forth from city council when the purpose of this working committee is to present and recommend an ordinance for council.
So it sounds like there's gonna be a little bit of, the sensitive uses, the setbacks, which is, you know, I heard from a couple people here, which is the state recommendation. And then we're talking about now the uses. We just need to know how much, right?
Mhm.
So can we start, creating that in the, study session? And I also want to make sure that we stay on point so that we can continue to discuss something that is not going to be a Brown Act violation. So can we please make sure that everything that needs to be said during this study session is agendized and put on the agenda, and we're discussing those and not falling out of the purview of the purpose for the study session, please.
Yes, so we will, I think the study session will consist of presentation by the consultants, and then a discussion about the sensitive uses aspect and the mapping and whatnot. So those will be itemized in a study session. I have a feeling that the study session will take some time. I don't know if we want to do a special meeting for that.
I would suggest we do.
Okay, so we could do a special meeting for council, and in terms of the dates, you know, we'll coordinate with Ms. Anderson on that, and present topics. So far we have the study session will include a presentation of the different aspects of the industry, then a discussion by council members regarding the sensitive use aspect and the locations of where certain type of business may be allowed, and then if we may want to have a discussion action where they vote on the different types of license, because I would expect that the sensitive use location would depend on the licensing that the council would want to, you know, decide to go with or not include. So I think that's further down the line, and Ms. Anderson still needs time to come up with the presentation and whatnot. So in terms of the dates, we can discuss this further, I guess, at the next working committee meeting as well, about topics to be in that special meeting that would include the study session.
Yeah, and if, since we've already have item number 7 that we're discussing, which is the revenue portion of it, but more importantly, the benefits, the community benefits and the employment opportunities, I think that should be something to be included in the presentation of the industry aspect portion of that. But because ultimately there's going to be another committee formed, which is going to review the application itself and creation of an application. However, I think we just need to make sure that we're including all the discussions that we've made here today with regards to the types, the revenue, the moreover, just the revenue sources, the employment opportunities, the discussions on mapping, the sensitive uses, and the presentation itself on the industry aspect. So all of that wrapped in one, and then ultimately if there's a decision to be had, we have a special meeting that we're going to be calling so that we stay within the agenda, and that could ultimately happen since it's a special meeting to address all of those, and we need direction from the council. Moreover, we need approvals to move forward with additional ordinances. That is very important, again, for a well-rounded cannabis program. Anything more? That was number 9. That was the reports and recommendation. Is there anything further that anyone would like to add? Anything? Yes, Ms. Anderson, go ahead.
Yes, I just, I think we skipped just the formal recap. So I just want to do that into the record, if I may, Madam Chair.
Yep.
Okay, so the recap from this meeting is that our next meeting will be on April 14th, and at that meeting we will take a look at the sensitive use maps, assuming that they'll be prepared by that time. And we'll look at the existing sensitive uses that our planning director has identified, which includes parks, schools, both public and private schools, treatment centers, and daycare centers. We will not include churches or other uses outside of those. We will have a study session with the city council that will include economic opportunities presented by the cannabis business types, a conversation about community benefit program, local hiring requirements, and then of course ensuring that we have some type of program that encourages equity, diversity, and inclusion. And then of course our LPA, which is required at the state level anyway, but that's our labor peace agreement. And then the number of licenses per activity type. We will also take those sensitive use maps back to the city council for them to adopt those sensitive uses. And we will do that either formally or informally based on the recommendations of the city attorney.
Right. And real quick, city attorney, Mr. Kim, can we give an idea today, on a special meeting that we could, city manager, provide to the city council to ultimately get that on the books for a special meeting?
Yeah, so in terms of the dates for that, I'm gonna have to, keep in conversation with Ms. Anderson to see when she'll be ready to do the presentation for the study session. So I'll work around her timeline for that, and then come back to council and set a special meeting for that purpose.
Okay.
Robert, is there any way to set a week aside, to earmark a week that could be a tentative set date?
Well, the thing is, I don't know, the study session will primarily involve the presentation first. So I don't know when, Ms. Anderson, do you have a kind of expected date, estimated date?
I think we're gonna have, our next session is the 14th, and that's when April 14th, and that's when we'll be able to have the maps. I think it's critical that we have those maps for the study session. So I would say sometime after April 14th. So I would at least say maybe that last week of April, or perhaps the first week of May. I think that would be a realistic timeline for us. But of course, if we are able to expedite that in any kind of way, I'm open to it. But I think if we're just planning ahead or thinking, ahead, maybe we think about having it that last week in April.
I agree, yeah.
So maybe at the next working committee, we would have more better idea
Absolutely.
of this. Okay.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think today we offered a lot and we covered a lot. I know we missed a meeting. However, we're still moving along and assuring, again, good information and discussion and recommendations are being made. If there's anything further from anyone here, thank you for your time, more importantly, your work. I'm gonna go ahead and adjourn this meeting. The time now is 12:05. Thank you so much.